Hey guys, we've recently partnered with the social media platform Go Wild to combat mainstream social media censorship. If you're tired of having your hunting and outdoor posts taken down and flagged, be sure to check out Go Wild, which was built by outdoorsmen and women just like you. Go Wild is a free social community. Not only are your photos not censored, but they are also encouraged on Go Wild. Go Wild gives you points for things like sharing your trophies, gear reviews, and inviting friends. As you earn more points, you unlock awesome rewards such as gift cards, free swag, knives, and huge discounts on brands like Garmin and Vortex. Oh, and if you create a free account, you can unlock $10 just for trying it out. Use code HTW to receive 10% off your order today. Download Go Wild at gowild.com or in the App Store.
To hunt the wild, to hunt the wild, gonna hunt the wild.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Hunt the Wild podcast. I'm your host, Adam Bowlds, and today I'm joined with Epic Chef Kevin Blankenship. How you doing, Kevin?
I'm doing well. I'm glad to be here. Excited.
Yes, sir. Can you just introduce and tell everybody a little bit about yourself, maybe some of your background, and then we'll dive into some of these questions.
Well, I live in Southwest Missouri. I've been here my whole life, almost 35 years. It'll be 35 in April. I'm a single father. I have an 8-year-old little girl, and I'm obviously a chef. I currently work for a company called Fresh Ideas, and I've been with them since I graduated culinary school in 2016. And we provide food service for college and universities. We also have some K through 12s and a couple other sectors of the industry. I've cooked since I was 5 or 6. It all started with me getting tired of the same old thing my family made as a child and just jumping in there and starting to cook. Hunting and fishing has been a part of my life since then as well. I started fishing when I was like 2 with my grandpa and my stepdad when I was about 6. And we hunt. I pretty much hunt anything that's available here with the exception of waterfowl. I've never waterfowl hunted. It's not something that I despise. I definitely will want to do so. Love to eat it, but just never hunted it.
Yeah, it's a little expensive to get involved in. That's kind of why I haven't got involved in it yet. I don't really have a boat, and I know you don't always need a boat, but I don't know a whole lot of people that waterfowl hunt, and I don't have thousands to dish out right out of hand if I've never ever been. So yeah, I'd like to get involved in some waterfowl too. So what's it growing up? What's it like growing up in Missouri? What are the hunting opportunities like there?
I guess it'd be hard. I'm probably a little biased because I've never lived anywhere else, and I've only been south a couple of times to hog hunt when I was younger. But it's beautiful here. Rolling hills, oaks and hickories and cedars, and there's deep hollers and steep hills. But the opportunities, I enjoy them. I particularly enjoy hunting squirrels, and I've been rabbit hunting a few times when I was younger, but I don't have dogs nor the time to train them. And so I don't do that. If I come across one, then I harvest one if it's within legal season because they're delicious to eat. But there's great opportunities. I would say probably leans more towards private land, but there's plenty of public land to hunt, which I've gotten accustomed to since I've become adult. I hunted on 1,500 acres of private land when I was young, and then since lost access to it. So it's been a transition for sure.
So
Weather's crazy here.
the public land there, is it? I imagine I probably already know the answer to this, but maybe I'm wrong. Is the public land there pretty crowded like it is everywhere else, or do you kind of feel like you have it to yourself sometimes?
It just kind of depends on where you go, and obviously the standard holds that the farther back you get, the less people you see. But we don't have a whole lot of deep area here. We've got Mark Twain National Forest and a couple other places that are large, but it's crowded. But I wouldn't say it's impossible to get out there and get in some area that has had little pressure or to no pressure.
So I want you to be honest here, even though you probably don't want a lot of people coming to your state to hunt. Um, would you recommend somebody travel to Missouri to hunt? Do you think it's worth the kind of the time and the money and the effort and all that to go there and maybe chase whitetails or something else? Or do you think there's better places to go, or maybe you shouldn't waste your time?
Oh, I definitely think it's a productive place to come. If you come here and want to spend a little bit of time and do your due diligence, or if you're doing it a DIY, if you know, there's obviously places you can hire too, but it's definitely worth the trip, I think. And there's a lot of opportunity for some nice deer here and great turkey hunting. There's some good sized deer. Now, you're not going to get the 220, 250-pound deer that you would up north. But as far as trophy hunting and such, if you're looking for something that's a mature buck, then there's some good ones in here, especially if you don't mind doing some walking and a little bit of leg work and getting back in there. So I would definitely encourage people to consider it for sure.
So, do you guys have bear in Missouri? I feel like I've heard that you do.
You know, we just this last season, and man, I looked it up. I think it was in late winter last year is the first season that we've had a bear season, and I think they had, I want to say 40 or 50 tags. I'm not 100% sure, and it was a draw system to my knowledge, along with elk. This was the first 2021 was the first year that elk were available to be hunted here too. And so yes, there is some, and there's been quite a bit of talk. I grew up hunting further south. I'm around Springfield where I live, but I grew up hunting in just north of Branson around Taney County. And there were reports of one or two every so often when I was a kid, but it's just been in the last 4 or 5 years that they're starting to come in further north in Missouri.
You think you'll ever get involved in anything like that? You say you probably never bear hunted, so you probably don't know a whole lot about it like myself. You think maybe in the future you might try to chase after one of those? I imagine they're good to eat.
Yeah, you know, I hear all the time about people bear meatloaf and bear steaks and you know all that, and so I know they're good. I've never personally eaten it. As far as going to harvest one, if I had the opportunity, heck yeah, man. I love anything like that. And would it be a little intimidating? Probably, yeah, because I've thought about applying for the tag now. This upcoming season, but I read in there that if you apply and you get selected, then you cannot apply again for another 10 years. So I thought, well, shoot, maybe it might be in my best interest to learn a little bit and sit back and see how this rolls first and then go from there. So, but yeah, I would definitely love to do so at some point.
Yeah, I've been wanting to bear hunt for a long time. I just I could probably line something up, I imagine, but I just haven't had the chance, I guess. Maybe try Tennessee, or I don't know, maybe Missouri in a couple of years if they get enough tags. I don't know if 50s. I don't know if I'm lucky enough to draw on a 50 tag thing, but never know. So
yeah, man, all it takes is once.
So I brought you on here on the podcast to talk a lot about kind of cooking wild game and stuff. You're a chef, so you know a lot about recipes and marinades and all this stuff that maybe a lot of us don't know about. So thought you could give some good information to the listeners on maybe how they should cook some of the animals they're killing. Can you kind of explain how you got started cooking wild game and maybe why you were drawn to that more than maybe stuff you buy from the store, like beef or pork or something like that?
Well, man, originally, um, it was just kind of a way of life. This is what my family did when I was growing up. We hunted and uh, used that. I wouldn't say all the time for our protein, our meat, and what we ate, but quite a bit of the time. And we didn't have much when I was young, so that was obviously a good benefit to that too. Is if we had the 1,500 acres had access to were family owned, so it didn't cost us anything to go there, and of course just whatever it costs to buy the tag or whatever. But um, and then it just kind of transitioned from there. I've fished a lot in my life and have always fished a lot. I've hunted a lot as well. There's been intermittent times where I might have stepped back from it a little bit, or didn't harvest something, or whatever the case may be on that. But it's just progressed over the years, and then here in my career, really just in the last few months, it's really become important to me to try to merge my love for the outdoors and providing food with my career and what I do for a living. And so it's just kind of evolved here pretty quickly to this level of it. But man, I dearly enjoy it. And it's something that the more I incorporate, the more satisfaction and joy it brings.
So you talked about doing a lot of fishing and stuff when you grew up. Were you cooking a lot of those fish too, I guess?
Oh yeah, we definitely would. I mean, as far as the fish goes, especially when I was younger, the big primary uh, meal and function was to have a big fish fry, which we still do today. But yeah, definitely. I am not a person that personally likes a lot of fish, or like if I go out, or if I won't gravitate to that. Now there are certain things I like to do with it that work well. For example, flatheads. I love to catfish, and flatheads a nice dense um, meat flesh, but it's not quite as gamey or fishy as what some of the other catfish, channel catfish, or even blues will be. So you can take those and clean them and then soak them in salt water for a couple of days, and they'll firm up real good. And you can dice them real small, and man, those make delicious street tacos or anything where you would put small chunks of meat like that in.
So you may know the answer, or you may have not messed with this, but I've heard different things about when people catch fish, they'll either want to keep them alive for a while until they're ready to clean them, or a lot of people will gill them to try to kill them. And some people do different stuff, sliding different instruments up their backs to kind of relax the muscles and make them more tender. Have you ever messed with anything like that, or how do you usually like kind of keep your fish until you're ready to kind of clean them or whatever? Have you noticed any kind of difference as far as meat quality when it comes to either gilling them or leaving them alive till you skin them, or clubbing them in the head or anything like that?
I have heard many different things, and some of them I have done over the course of like my entire fishing career, and I know where this came from. But something that's always been extremely important to me is the way that just like hunters, the way that I harvest the animal, and what I'm doing to it. Am I harvesting it in a way that is graceful, for lack of better words? And so my main focus anytime I'm doing that is what am I doing to the animal? Am I killing it quick? Am I causing it more turmoil or whatever that you can look at in that situation? And one of the things, I usually keep them alive only because They either go into a live well or I put them into a fish basket or on a stringer, which probably isn't the greatest thing as far as running it up their gills and mouths and from what I've been talking about. But I haven't personally ever noticed a difference with fish as far as if I bleed them out. Now, I guess I should back up a little bit. It depends on the fish that you catch. A carp, obviously, I don't think it's going to make much difference on how you kill it, but it is definitely going to make a huge difference on how you clean it and what you do with it after harvest. But I haven't, and now I have heard with guys that would catch 50, 60, 70, 80-pound cats. And I've also always had a thing, and this has just been a thing that I had when I was younger, that I wouldn't normally harvest something if it was older than I was, if it'd been living longer than I had, which is weird, I know, and now I'm old enough to where I don't have that problem. But some catfish, they can live decades. So I've personally never harvested anything over roughly 20, 25 pounds. But I have heard of guys hanging them and cutting their tails and letting them bleed out so that it loses some of that gamey taste. My biggest thing, I think personally, is after I clean it, and this is with any fish, mainly because I don't like the big fishy taste that some people do, is I soak them in ice cold salt water for at least a couple of days, and you can do it for 3 or 4 up to 5 days, and honestly, I've done it longer than that, because a big misconception when it comes to our meat and our food is that there's 7 days and that's it. And that's true whenever you buy it from the supermarket, because it's got about 3 weeks on it since it was harvested, butchered, and fabricated to when it hits the grocery stores. So you definitely have a little bit more time to manipulate the flavor in that fish if you so choose.
So something interesting I've dealt with this year, between my wife and I, we ended up killing 7 deer. I think she killed 1 doe and I killed 5 does and 1 buck. But everyone always says, "Why do you guys need so much meat? Why do you guys need more than 1 deer?" And I have a hard time kind of getting through people's heads that when you shoot a deer, it's not like having a cow butchered. Like, you don't get 500 pounds of meat off of a deer. So I was going to have you talk a little bit about maybe why do people always think that you get so much meat off of a deer, and how much meat you actually get off of a deer. People see that you killed a 140-pound deer or a 200-pound deer, they assume that you get 200 pounds of meat, but everybody seems to forget that there's bones and head and brain and everything in there. So can you touch a little bit on that?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's just a lack of knowledge as far as, and I think it starts with a big disconnect that I think as a whole the population has gotten, is that we are so used to being able to go to the store and purchase our food anytime we want. And with that comes the lack of understanding the need to store for future. So I think part of it is the fact that, just especially for those who aren't hunters or aren't people who harvest their own food, they just don't understand and grasp the concept of hunting and gathering. And so, but to step off onto the main question, I think that there is a big misconception on how much is an actual cow. And when we're talking about cattle, we're talking about an animal that is being raised specifically for this reason. So it is being fattened and in lots of cases spoon fed certain things to keep it from deteriorating or getting diseases, or keeping it healthy and making it bigger. And that's something that I think we'll touch on here more, and something that I'm real passionate about with Epic Chef is understanding what it is I'm eating, and why that product is the way that it is, and why is it that I go and I take a bite of a tomato from the grocery store and I don't taste hardly anything, but if I grow it, I've got something completely different that is delicious. And so I think that with those two things, it's really kind of shifted society quite a bit.
So I'm gonna venture and say that most hunters, around my parts anyway, are eating deer. They might not be eating squirrels and rabbits and pheasants and what have you, but I would say most people eat deer that hunt. What kind of what are your opinions on the best cuts and the worst cuts of a deer, and what ways would you recommend to cook either the worst cuts or the best cuts? I have a feeling you're going to say backstrap or inside tenderloins, but I could be wrong.
I mean, it just depends on your definition of the best, and for me as a chef, I probably think about it a little differently, because I'm going to be thinking also about the application and the cooking technique and the recipe, and what it is that I'm going to do with it also. But obviously the most tender portion of that animal is going to be the inside tenderloin, which is the tenderloin that sets up against the spinal column or spinal cord up inside the rib cage. And then, of course, as you mentioned, the strip loin, the backstrap that runs along the opposite side of the spine, is going to be the two most tender cuts on there. So they're the ones that are the least worked. So if you are looking for a steak or something that can be seared whole or sliced, roasted whole and sliced thin and be cooked at any kind of different temperature, then definitely those are going to be your two best choices. I would say, the worst cut, I don't know, really what I do is I have a grind pile. And if there is a worst cut, or there's a cut that I can't do something with, or I don't think I can, which really there's not anything that, I don't personally think there's not anything on a deer that can't be cooked in a way that, without being ground or dehydrated, that can't be cooked in a way that makes it delicious and tender and edible. It's just going to depend on where it's at. Like the front shoulder, for example, that's the most worked muscle in the deer, with the exception of maybe the breast. But there's usually not a whole lot of meat in that area. And so that's going to lend itself well to slow cooking with moisture, whether you do it in a crock pot or you braise it, you sear it on each side, and then put it in a pot with a lid on it with liquid, and then cook it in the oven for a couple hours. There's a lot of things you can do to the tough portions of the deer to utilize it all. And like I said, at the end of the day, if all else fails, the grind pile is always good. In fact, I usually dedicate at least one deer to that, with the exception of the tenderloins and the backstraps. I don't generally grind those because I just can't let myself do it. But I like to grind it with a ratio of 5-to-1 venison to bacon. And that just gives it a little bit. If you go any higher than that, you can taste the bacon a lot more than you can the venison. But yeah, and then of course you got jerky. I mean, almost everybody loves jerky, and you can marinate it, you can manipulate the flavor, and you can those real tough, like the belly, the underbelly there, and some of the parts that are up against the bones on the shoulders and different stuff like that. Neck, meat. Those are all good for jerky and stew meat as well. You can cut them up, dice them up small, and braise them, and make some good stuff out of that.
So I think I've talked about this on the podcast before, but I am very, very super against wrapping anything in bacon. And the reason for me being that way, and you mentioned mixing, bacon or pork fat into your venison. I have this, so I like bacon, but I like if I want to eat deer meat or I want to eat beef, like I want to taste what I'm eating. And for me, maybe it's just me, but I feel like anything pork, like bacon wrapped, anything just kind of like takes away from it or overpowers it. Have you ever heard anybody talk about that, or how do you kind of feel about that? I know you probably like bacon if you're mixing it in your stuff. Maybe you can change my mind.
I think it's 100% subjective, of course, to the personal likes and dislikes of somebody. And at the end of the day, people ask me all the time what my favorite thing to cook is and what my favorite thing to why I become a chef. And at the end of the day, it's because I love to serve people. And part of serving people is serving people in the form that they enjoy. And so that kind of goes twofold. And so when they ask me what I like to cook, most generally, I will say I like to cook whatever it is that's good to the person that I'm serving. Now, sometimes that means that it's anything, and sometimes it's not. And in this particular scenario, your preference is that, and I have heard of that, and it's not wrong. You are right that the bacon, and it's essentially what it is the smoke and the salt in the bacon. And it's just like if you were to take whatever it is you're eating and add smoke to it and add quite a bit of saltiness to it, and then another texture, of course, and then so you're mixing that into the pile, and it definitely can overpower. I think lots of times I think sometimes less is more. So if you do use bacon in an application with deer meat, and I have wrapped deer fillets in bacon, and I've done just about anything you can do with bacon, because the majority of the population loves it. I think one of the things you can do is people will tend to get a real thick piece of bacon and use that to wrap around it, thinking, oh yeah, I got this real thick fillet, I'm going to get this real thick piece of bacon, and we're just going to have a delicious dinner. And that's not incorrect. It can be delicious, and like I said, that's pretty subjective to the person. But using a real thin piece of bacon, I do think that it can complement things, and I do tend to think that bacon will complement vegetables and starches and things of that nature far more than it does another meat, especially a red meat. That being said, I don't dislike eating bacon wrapped steaks or chicken or whatever, but I think the trick is if you do want to do it, if maybe in your case, and you've never really liked it as much, finding a balance between the protein that you're using and the bacon that you're using and how you're using it. Sometimes maybe wrapping something in bacon may be a little too much, but if you have some bacon that's been cooked off and then you crush it and then you just use a bacon dust inside your sauce or on the bottom of your plate, and you kind of eat a little bit of crispy bacon dust with that meat, it could change how you do it. And also, I love to candy bacon. I like to make it sweet, and I love contrasting flavors, sweet and spicy, sweet and savory. And so to take a jalapeno popper stuffed with cream cheese. A lot of people like to wrap those in bacon. Take a little piece of bacon and cut it down the middle and not cover the whole jalapeno in it, but just wrap a little ribbon around it that's been candied, and it kind of adds in a different note. And if you do it right, it all kind of meshes together and complements and creates a new flavor. But if you're solely looking to intending to taste a deer fillet, no sauce, good seasoning, then yeah, I think bacon's going to mess with that for sure.
Yeah, that's me. I'm a sear for a few seconds on each side and dip it in its own blood kind of guy.
Yep. Yep.
So this kind of just popped in my head. Have you ever heard of anybody wrapping fish in bacon?
Well, I mean, I've wrapped scallops in bacon a lot, and shrimp. I don't think that I've ever, especially a fish that I could catch within my local bounds. I not heard of that. No, nor have I ever thought to do it or done it, because it would certainly overpower the actual flavor of the fish. But sometimes that's not necessarily a bad thing, especially if it's fishy. But that's kind of an interesting question. I've never thought of that.
Yeah, if anybody listening has ever heard of anybody wrapping fish in bacon, or catching a local largemouth bass and putting a big slab of bacon across it when you fry it or something, let me know, because it just popped in my head and I've never heard of it. So I wanted to ask Kevin his expertise on that.
I think it'd be interesting. I think you could definitely fry some fish in some bacon grease. Now that would be killer.
That would be interesting. If you ever try that, you'll have to let me know how that turns out.
Absolutely.
What would you say is the most popular way that people cook venison? Just people around you or people that you've seen. What's the most common way to cook it? Is it ground something?
Yeah, I would think that from what I've evaluated from other people, ground is probably the most consistent form of doing so. Now, in that's not necessarily a cooking method; it's just a fabrication method. So, what people do with it is quite different and varying. But I think it also depends on if you are speaking to a person that butchers their own deer or takes it to a processing plant. That's going to play a big part too, I think.
So for anybody listening that maybe just got involved in hunting, or their uncle's friend gave them some venison or something, and they're going to try to cook it, could you talk about maybe what the easiest way or the best way for somebody to maybe start at? Let's just assume that they got a couple packets of ground, and let's assume that they got maybe some backstrap that's butterflied or something. Can you kind of talk about an easy, good way to cook that? Kind of maybe a foolproof, we'll put that in quotations, kind of method for them.
Yeah, well, with the ground, I think one of our all-time favorite things to do with the ground is to make tacos, and to do that, or make chili, and that's something that adds a whole lot of flavor into it. So it gives you a little bit of flavor and really on cooking ground venison, I don't think you'd really have to do something to mess it up real bad. I mean, it's going to be about the same thing as cooking beef or turkey or chicken or whatever. As I say, as far as the backstrap, my family, as I grew up, they would country fry venison into country fried steak quite often, and I have a special place for that in my heart. That is absolutely delicious, and honestly, it's really not super hard. And also, if you tenderize it and you pound it out into smaller or thinner pieces, then it's going to cook quicker. It's going to be more tender. Even if you do overcook it, it's going to be tender. So it's probably a little more work than some people may be looking for, but I definitely think that doing like a country fried steak out of it is a way that can introduce people to having venison that maybe is not familiar with it. It's not too hard to cook. It doesn't take a real long time, and it tastes great.
So you touched a little bit on meat being tender. Is there different ways to tenderize meat when it comes to, let's say, a deer compared to an elk, compared to a squirrel, compared to a rabbit, or is there kind of just a method that kind of fits for all game species?
Well, I think probably the most, or I would say the two most specific ways would be obviously cooking method. Now, if you take a squirrel, it's just a tough animal. There's just not a part on that squirrel that's tender. There might be one little bitty bite right there on the back along the spine, but something's trying to chase them things and eat them things 24 hours a day. So, I mean, every second of the day. So they're always moving. And I mean, I know they nest, but they don't sit still very long. So you're going to have to take that into consideration, and fabricating out a squirrel and having the hind leg and or even the back, and then just breading it and frying it. You're going to be able to eat it, but it's going to be a little chewy and kind of tough. And there's just no way of getting around that. You can soak that in salt water and you can marinate it, and you're going to get a little bit more tender. But you're just not going to be able to, at least in my findings, you're not going to be able to change that unless you change something up in the whole process and the cooking method. And one thing that I've found with like a squirrel, something that is like that is hard to get tender at all anyway, other than how you cook it. You can put them in the crock pot and cook them real slow and shred the meat off of it like that, and then use it in whatever you would. Or if you do want to fry something of that nature, then you can, I will cook it, braise it, whether it be boil it or simmer it in stock until it's cooked and you could possibly eat it then. But then you cool it down, you bread it, and then fry it, and you've got that real crisp breading on the outside, and it's tender on the inside. As far as like you get up into elk and deer and whitetail, you can soak them in salt water, and that helps. But for me, the most primary thing I do is how I process it, how I butcher it, how long I age it. Because what happens when you harvest that animal, it instantly starts decaying, essentially. And that's what we're looking for. And that, from the moment you harvest something, if you throw it on a grill and you cook it, it's going to be vastly different than if 2 weeks from then you do so. And I think that's probably a step that gets missed a lot, because a lot of people don't process their own animal. But there's quite a few people that do. But like this year, I shot a younger deer, a spike, and I butchered it out, and I have a little shed out there that I do it in, and then I can if the weather cooperates fairly decently, I can control the environment in it quite well, and I let it age for, on average, any given deer that I shoot, I will let age for about 5 to 7 days, if the timing's right, the weather's right, and I have the ability to do so. But on this particular one, I left some of the front shoulder meat and let it age for about another 2 weeks, which I know there's gonna be people listening that are probably thinking this guy's crazy. There's no way that meat was good. And it was, you can, like I mentioned earlier, I think there's a big gap in the knowledge of what our food, the path that our food takes from harvest to consumption when we're purchasing it from the industrial industry. And so there's just learning those little things. And I think that's probably one of the best things that you can do to tenderize in it for it to be tender. I think the second thing is going to be most imperative is going to be the cooking method again, and the right application for the right piece of meat. You don't want to take a chunk out of the front shoulder and even cut it 1/4 inch thick and then throw it on a grill and eat it mid-rare, because you're gonna spend half your time chewing it.
So I know you touched a little bit on kind of shooting a deer and then throwing it straight on the grill is going to taste a little bit different than shooting one and aging it, or shooting one and freezing it and then throwing it on the grill. So I've heard, I want to say it was on another podcast, that there was a guy talking that if you shoot a deer and you immediately cut the back straps out and throw them on a grill before rigor mortis sets in, they're actually not going to taste as good as once rigor mortis sets in. He was like a meat scientist or something, and he obviously it would be really hard to shoot a deer and grill it before rigor sets in. But let's just say you do or whatever. He was saying that the rigor actually helps the meat kind of tenderize or taste better. I don't know if you're familiar with anything like that or not, but I thought it was an interesting kind of concept. Kind of goes along with I guess aging or freezing. You know, like letting meat sit or whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, he's absolutely right, and I'm not as scientific, obviously. Like, I won't be able to explain the process like I'm sure like he or somebody in that field could, but essentially that rigor mortis, the decaying of the animal, is what is causing the flavor to change and to become better, and the tenderness to become better, and that's what aging is. That's exactly what aging is. I think that it's been reworded over the course of time to make it, to glorify it and make it sound a little better, but that is what is happening in that process. Is that muscle is decaying, it's deteriorating, it's going back to the earth, essentially. And there's enzymes within the muscles, the proteins, and there's amino acids, and as those stop having blood circulate through them and be living, they begin to change and die off, and there's chemical reactions that happen, and that's really what makes our food what it is.
I think it's interesting. Probably a lot of people that aren't real big into like aged meat or whatever think that meat sitting around is going to be bad or not as good. But nobody really bats an eye when you take a piece of fruit and you let it age, because we know that when fruit gets a little riper or starts to decay and rot, pretty much it's actually more flavorful and juicy. Like, you don't want to eat a strawberry that's super, super, I guess, yellowed or greened. You kind of let them ripen up and they get juicy. And that's kind of the same concept with meat. I think people are just scared of getting sick or something. I never really understood it. I'll leave meat in my fridge that I've killed for a couple of weeks, and I don't have any issues. I've never got sick. Now I'll knock on wood, because the next time I'll likely get sick now that I said that. But yeah, it is interesting. So you talked a little bit about like braising and stuff. I wanted you to touch on making like a stock out of wild game. Is there different methods for different wild game, and what's kind of the process of making stock? You just throw a piece of meat in some boiling water and let it simmer, or how's that really work?
Well, I mean, essentially, that's pretty close. You know, it depends on what you're wanting. It depends on the end result and what you're wanting. Now, in the restaurant world or the industrial commercial food industry, if I was to make stock, let's say chicken stock and I was to do it in a fairly traditional manner, that would be the leftover bones from fabricating an animal, and those would all of the trim, all of the fat, all of the protein, or all of the gristle, and just all of that, all the cartilage and all the stuff that's not usable, and that would be used to make the stock. And the traditional formula for a stock is 50% onion, 25% carrot, and 25% celery. And those can be, and that just adds to the flavor. So you would take that leftover trim and bones and whatnot, and you would put it into a large enough stock pot, and then add in the mirepoix, and you would add that, and then you would fill the pot with cold water, and it has to be cold water traditionally, because it's going to not have as much impurities and whatnot in it. It's not in it as it comes up. It's going to draw out the impurities in all of the stuff that's in there, and then they will float to the top. And to do it traditionally, you create what's called a raft, and you add egg whites in there, and it pulls everything out of it, and then makes it consommé. Now that's far more trouble than a lot of people are going to want to go through, and honestly, most times more trouble than I want to go through. So when I'm making it at home, you can use really whatever you want. If you've got pieces of leftover scrap meat, you can put that in the pile. You can use, take the bones. The one thing I would say is, in like fowl or poultry, turkey, if you're going to make turkey stock, chicken stock, you can pretty much just throw the bones and the meat and stuff in there with the water, and you don't have to do anything to the bones. When you get into red meat, and in restaurants it would be beef, but typically, but at home, if you've got a deer for say you want to make stock out of, cut those bones into smaller pieces so that way you got manageable and they can fit in the stock. And one real good thing to do is to roast those bones off at like 450 degrees and caramelize them, and that's going to help release the marrow on the inside. That's going to just give them a more depth and flavor. And then you would put it in there with the water and simmer it for, hours on end. You can do it really to the extent that your heart desires. The longer you go, the stronger it gets, and the better flavor you can have.
So when it comes to bones and bone marrow, have you ever heard of people pulling out the bone marrow and just eating it by itself, or maybe using it? I feel like I've heard people using it almost as like a spread, like they do butter. Have you played with anything like that, or tasted anything like that?
I have made stock with the product, my harvests at any given time, and I can say that when you cut the bones down and it does add a really good flavor. Like, it helps in that sense. I have not personally like split the bones and eaten the bone marrow out of a whitetail or anything elk. Have heard of people doing it. It's supposed to be super good for you, and it is supposed to be really delicious. The one thing I can relate to that is like, if I love country ham, and 99.9% of the time country ham has a bone in it. And when you get that little bone, there's always that little piece of, when I was a kid, I thought it was just extra ham, and I would save it till the end and eat it. But that's actually the bone marrow that's been cooked, and it's delicious. It's absolutely delicious, and it's real rich, and you can take that and scoop that out, and you can add stuff to it and blend it up and make a spread or whatever it is that I've heard of it being piped out kind of as like a sauce almost, to, instead of a herbed butter or compound butter, it'd be used marrow be used, and it's delicious.
Yeah, I like I said, I between my wife and I, we killed 7 deer this year. Some of them we took to a meat locker. Some of them I did myself, and the ones I did myself, I was kind of rushing to get them done because it was the rut, and I wanted to get back out and hunt. So I didn't end up saving the bones like I wanted to. I'm kind of regretting that now, but I think next year I'm going to try to do that and play with some bone marrow. I'm really intrigued by maybe just eating it by itself, but I'm gonna have to find a good way to roast the bones or cook that stuff up and figure out how to crack it without cutting my finger off.
Yeah, that can definitely be tricky. I mean, and I'll definitely look into it, and I'll give you some. I'll figure something out for you for when you do that, and find out the best way.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. So um, when we talk about defrosting and thawing meat, how much does it matter when you're cooking? Let's say I'm going to make a dish. Um, let's say I'm going to make something with ground, and I'm going to use a package of of thawed out meat that's been sitting in my fridge. It's completely thawed out, good to go. And I'm going to make the same dish, but I'm going to use a package of frozen meat that I'm going to throw in the microwave and defrost it within 10-15 minutes of me cooking with it. Is there going to be a whole lot of difference in flavor, texture, anything like that, or does it really matter?
Um, I don't think, especially with ground. Now, if you get into whole muscle, like if you're grilling a steak or doing something like that, I think it is definitely gonna change the game for you if you're defrosting it like that in the microwave. Ground meat, especially if you are make tacos or chili or spaghetti or something like that, it's probably not going to make a whole lot of a difference, because really what you're doing when you throw it in there, because microwaves aren't that exact, and it's going to get hotter than it takes to defrost it at some point and begin to partially cook it. And then I don't think that that's going to be a bad thing or really even change the flavor, especially if you're adding seasoning. I think now the one place that it would cause a problem is if you were doing so with ground meat and you wanted to make like patty burgers, or you wanted to do a meatloaf or something where you needed that meat to bind together. Then it definitely wouldn't work. The meat wouldn't even hold together once you got it warm, unless you were really good.
So, also brings me to the question of thawing meat and refreezing meat. So let's say I took some meat out a couple days ago, um, and it's thawed out. I was going to cook with it tonight, and I realized, oh man, we're going on vacation tomorrow. I completely forgot. I'm going to throw this meat back in the freezer. Um, does that kind of stuff matter? Is it still safe to eat? You feel like? Is it going to mess with the texture and maybe the outcome of the dish?
It is. It's going to. Well, I mean, first off, if you followed proper protocol to thaw it, put it in the refrigerator, or slacked it under slow running cold water and it didn't sit out for an extended amount of time after it had thawed, um, then it's going to be safe to eat if you refreeze it and then thaw it again, as long as you follow the proper protocol the second time thawing it. And I think that's probably one of a big misunderstanding in cooking, is that if something goes wrong, the meat ends up turning bad, and the meat itself does not. It's the bacteria that grows on it in certain scenarios. Now, as far as refreezing it and changing the flavor, if you're doing a whole muscle, then yeah, it's going to change it, and it's going to change the tenderness, because you're changing the form of that meat. You're taking it from softer as it is natural state, and then you're freezing every bit of liquid that's inside of it. And then thawing it back again, you're releasing that liquid. But something that happens every time you freeze something is and then thaw it back out, it loses a small amount of its moisture content, and that's what freezer burn. That's where freezer burn comes from. Is it's extracting the moisture out of there, and so it is going to change it after a while. Is it improper or unheard of? No, I've done it, and I think a lot of it has to do with how you package it. If you do it yourself, the less oxygen and the thinner of a package you can have, the better. And actually, I that's why I do freeze mine the way that I do with a vacuum pack and in thinner portions. Is if I forget to pull something, unless it's just a big 4, 5, 6 pound roast, then I can thaw pretty much any package of meat in 10 to 12 minutes under cold running water.
So something that's kind of popped in my head while we were having this conversation, talking about freezers and packaging and stuff. So we often, at least me, I like to drink out of like metal cups or like BPA free water bottles. Everybody's super worried about like microplastics and stuff like that. But something that I haven't really seen in like the industry and packing game meat and just like in stores, I guess in general, is we package everything in plastic. Do you ever wonder about maybe some of the microplastics or stuff from the game bags or the vacuum seal bags kind of leaching into your meat? Maybe you've never thought about it before, but it's kind of something that I've thought about in the past and just kind of popped in my head all of a sudden. I wanted to kind of get your opinion on stuff like that. Is there a better way to do it? I know we can use butcher paper, but people still usually put saran wrap or something around that too. Is there any way to fight it?
Sure. And that's a good question. It's a great question and a great thing to think about. I've often thought of that too, and I think in the world that we live in, we try to strive for such a transparency, but in reality, we're not near as transparent. Things aren't near as transparent as what we think. And for example, with this, like at the end of the day, I can pull the ingredients of every single thing that they may list that's in that package, that packaging plastic, and cross check it and try to figure out what exactly each ingredient and that's going to do. But other than doing that, I'm kind of at the mercy of our regulation systems that we have, the FDA, USDA, and so I think that it does something to the food if you take a piece of plastic and wrap it in it and then set it out in an environment to where it is warm enough or in the right temperature to draw out anything that could be in that plastic into the meat. Yes, I definitely think it's possible. I'm not a super big fan of plastic. That being said, like you did mention butcher paper, and that is a great option. And then of course too, though, you run into the same question. Do I really know what ingredients and how this paper was made? So I definitely think it's a valid concern and kind of runs along lines with the whole theme for Epic Chef as well, about really knowing what you're doing to your body, knowing what you're eating and what you're putting in it and where it's coming from. And in that case, I think it's possible that you could alter the flavor if you'd have to work at it. Like, I don't think freezing something in plastic wrap is necessarily going to leach out anything into the meat or change the flavor because of the plastic itself. But I do think that plastic is not a very good suitable material to freeze in. And if you don't remove oxygen out of that plastic or go against add butcher paper into it or something, then it's definitely going to shorten the shelf life for sure.
Yeah, it's something. A lot of times I'll pull a bag of ground out of my freezer that's in those typical camouflage bags that everybody uses, or a meat locker might use, and I'll throw
Yeah.
that in if I want to defrost my meat. But like you said, it doesn't always just defrost it. It kind of cooks it a little bit, and you pull it out, you forget doing something, and next thing you know, the package is hot and warm, and it just kind of makes you wonder how much of that plastic's kind of leaching into your meat. Maybe they could, maybe somebody could invent some kind of plant-based plastic. I know that they make like some kind of plant-based plastic now. Maybe somebody can do that for wild game bags or something. That'd be cool. Probably be expensive, but um, it's probably something I'd invest in because I don't really want to eat any microplastics.
I don't either. I agree, and that's pretty high on my priority list as well.
So, when it comes to using oil while cooking wild game, is there any kind of specific oil you should use? Vegetable oil, olive oil? Um, does it really matter? I guess it probably depends on the dish, but have you found anything to be better with other things?
Well, I think first you got to ask the question, what are you going to do with it? Are you trying to fry with the particular oil that you're using? Are you just going to be sauteing? Um, or is it going actually inside as an ingredient? If you're going to fry something, then I would not suggest olive oil. And there's different smoking points for different oils. And depending on how you're planning on cooking the item. Now, if you wanted to poach sous vide a piece of fish inside of olive oil, then yeah, you can definitely do that. But you got to really keep track of the temperature. Olive oil, and I don't know the exact temperature, but olive oil smokes a lot lower. Its smoking point is a lot lower temperature than what vegetable oil or canola oil would be, or even peanut oil. As far as just an all-purpose general, what do I use? I use vegetable or olive oil. If I'm searing a piece of meat or sauteing it, stir fry or whatever, and that brings up another thing. I really like sesame oil a lot. It's very strong, and you can't like fry something in it or poach something in it, but you can certainly saute stuff, and it gives a little bit of an earthy flavor that you just wouldn't get from vegetable oil or canola oil. But I think if it were me, either olive oil for sauteing and grilling, and that's it. But really, even grilling, if you're brushing your meat with some oil, and you're wanting to keep it from sticking on the grill or add nice grill marks on it, then a vegetable oil for something that's higher heat is what's needed.
Yeah, I often use olive oil a lot, and sometimes I kind of wonder if I'd use a different oil, kind of what the outcome would be. So I might have to try some different oils and recipes that I normally do, and see if that either makes it better or makes it worse. So we hear people talk about the word gamey a lot when they refer to like wild game, like whether it be a deer or a squirrel or a rabbit. Somebody will say that's gamey. Do you think gamey is just how the animal really tastes? Like maybe gamey is just kind of like doesn't really exist. You know what I'm trying to say? A rabbit tastes like a rabbit, but since people aren't used to eating rabbits, they have no other way to kind of describe it other than gamey, because everyone's so used to eating chicken, beef, and pork.
Yeah, I definitely think that, and it's been a topic over the course of the conversation, some that we just as a whole have become accustomed to domesticated animals, and so you take that, and it's just like if you go and eat it, like I mentioned earlier, eat a tomato from the grocery store, it really don't taste like a whole lot. And it's just the way it is, and that's what happens whenever you take a particular item and you force upon it manipulation to make what you want out of it. And I think it runs the same with meat and protein too. I agree with what you're saying. I think venison it tastes like venison, and it does get labeled as gamey or strong or a different flavor, and there is some of that when it comes to game meat. They are surviving; they're not just living, and in that it plays a big difference in the makeup and what happens with their body and what their body does. And I think personally the biggest disconnect when it comes to this and eating wild game and the difference between it being gamey and being milder, like domesticated or whatever, is how it's processed and how it's done. And I have specifically eaten meat that was from processing plants versus something I did myself. And I, hands down, eyes closed, nose plugged, I can tell you which is which. And that doesn't mean that what comes from the processing plant is bad. I don't think that it is bad, and it's certainly far better than if you were to walk into Walmart and purchase a package of meat from there and then eat it. It's going to be better for you. It's going to, my opinion, taste better. That being said, wild game meat can be messed up in the processing portion of it. Can it make it to where it's inedible? I don't personally think so, but it can definitely make it to where it's different. And part of that comes with when it's being fabricated. I'm sure a lot of people have heard the name or the term sinew and fat and gristle or cartilage, and that sinew, that protective layer over that muscle that animal acquires, and especially in the front shoulders where there is no joint in the front shoulder when it comes to connecting it to the body. It's only done by muscle and tendon. And so when it does that, they've got this covering, this sinew on the outside. And if that's not removed, that, in my opinion, is where 75% of the gamey comes from. So yes, I agree. I think that we have gotten a long ways from where it was when God created this earth, and we have become very accustomed to eating things that are pretty much manipulated into being what we want them to be.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how blind people have become, just society as a whole. Like, I guess probably more in the United States than maybe, more than third world countries or something, where they're still kind of killing their own food and stuff. But I think it's funny that I've experienced situations where I would be processing, let's say, a deer, and sitting there with a big grind pile of fresh venison, and somebody would say, "Ooh, that's gross." But that same person would go to Walmart on their way home from leaving my house and buy a pound of ground beef. And, it looks kind of the same, but for some reason they're disgusted by what I have that I've just ground up that they think nothing about. Maybe it's because it's in a pretty package and there's not as much blood or something, but I just think it's so strange that people think that killing your own food and grinding it up and processing it is weird, but they'll go walk over to the meat aisle and pick up a piece of beef and not think anything of it.
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on that. I absolutely agree. And it is odd, and it's, I mean, I think it's due to a few things, but one of them is out of sight, out of mind. When you're going to a grocery store to purchase your food, you're doing just that. You're just buying your food. You're picking it up. You're not working for it. Now, you've worked for the money to buy it, but it's different than working for what it is you're going to eat, as in going to kill it and then process or butcher it and cook it and eat it. And I know that sounds really primitive and like caveman like, but it's the truth. And you know, as humans, it's bred into us to eat and to survive and to hunt and to fix things and to do it, you know, all the things that we do. And when you take away the need to do those things, it becomes a little nonchalant, I think.
You know, Kevin, if I was president, I think I would make it a law that if you're gonna eat meat at all anytime in your life, you should be required to kill and butcher an animal at least one time. Because I feel like um, there's just a different connection with your food, and I think a lot of people maybe would be able to experience and enjoy that, and they just don't realize that there is that connection. I've talked to a lot. I shouldn't say a lot, but I have talked to people that were at one time vegan, anti-hunting, and then they become a hunter and they kill it, and they're like, "Wow, I actually understand the connection now." Sometimes it just takes that whole process to really fully understand it. So when it comes to nutrients and wild game versus food you buy from the store, do you think wild game is gonna have more nourishment in it than something you would buy from the grocery store, rather that be something you forage or something that you kill, like a deer or a squirrel or something?
Hands down, yes. I mean, that's just a hard, flat yes. It Now, obviously, every animal is going to be different, and there might be instances where if you go and you purchase something, there could possibly be more nutrients in that particular item than if you go out and you harvest something different. As and I don't know of that. Like I everything that I know of, and I have a couple numbers here just for like venison, for example. A 3-ounce portion of venison holds 26 grams on average of protein. Beef, the same size, is 24.
Hmm.
Now, I'm not going to say that it's not possible for domesticated protein to have more, but I do think that if it did, it would have to be manually added.
Yeah.
That's again one of the things that is pretty important to me. And through this Epic Chef, what comes of it is trying to step back from that. Like venison has 50% of the iron in that 3-ounce portion that you need to intake on average in your day. So yeah, I think it's absolutely better that to go out and to for you, and not only that, it just on the nutrients level. And then if you take that and set that aside, if you're eating things that you know where it came from and you know that it's wild and that there's nobody's been out there spraying it or doing anything to it, you're not consuming all of the additives. I mean, and I don't know, I've known this for a long time in my career and in my life about what is in the things that we consume, but I don't know, for the last little while, and as I've been trying to develop Epic Chef and it's been coming about, it's really been heavy on my heart about what is in the stuff that we put in our body. It's killing us. It's absolutely killing us. You know, there's things that are acceptable in the food industry as far as the FDA and what can and cannot go in your food that would blow your mind.
So, yeah, that's just insane. When you go to talk about the different dyes and stuff that they put in stuff that are known to like cause cancer, but they're still allowed to put them in your 99-cent package of hot dogs. Like I just can't even fathom eating that stuff. But so I don't really know. Okay, I'll say that I don't know what meat at the grocery store costs. And my wife has heard people talk about at her work, like, oh, meat prices are going up. well, we kill 7 deer this year, so we don't have to mess with any of that. So we don't really know. But is there a proper way? And now I'm not endorsing like somebody to go out and sell their freezer full of bear meat or whatever, but is there a proper way to kind of value wild game? What do you think like a fancy steak at a grocery store costs compared to like a fancy deer cut? Like, or how much am I going to pay for like a backstrap at the grocery store if they were going to sell wild venison, or how much am I going to pay for a maybe a quartered up squirrel or a quartered up rabbit, just to kind of put in comparison of like, if you were to actually be able to buy this stuff, what it would cost because it's so natural and so organic.
Well, there's a butcher here in town that has exotic meats and wild game meats. I've been in there. I've even seen kangaroo in there. I've seen some crazy stuff. That said, I don't know what it takes to be able to sell that. But yes, all around meat prices are going up. This is a battle, and not only that, but production of it is hard to get, and or the product itself due to production. I would think that it would be pretty expensive, and if you were to put a price tag on venison for a backstrap, it's probably going to run pretty consistent with the price per pound of beef, and not necessarily because it's better or worse or the demand's greater or less. But in order to, and I'd have to brush up on this to know exactly what it takes to be able to sell wild game. But in order to be able to sell that to the public, it has to be inspected and it has to be signed off on, I believe. And so half of what you're paying for is that, because that's the FDA, USDA, all of those regulations, and the money from those officials has to come from somewhere. That being said, that's a good question, and the people that are telling your wife that is correct, that and it's dependent on where you're at, supply and demand, what's available, and like I said, even local labor ability, the labor pool. Right now, if you were to walk into Walmart in Springfield, Missouri, and try to buy a beef ribeye steak, you're going to pay anywhere from $18 to $22 a pound. Yeah.
Wow.
And as a chef, I used to bitch and complain when beef prices, filet prices, or whatever would be above $9 or $10 for a good quality piece of meat. So it's more than doubled, and that's at the consumer level. Some days now I could buy meat cheaper in Walmart for the singular portions rather than the bulk prices that I have available as an industrial chef.
Well, everybody out there, or anybody out there that's buying store-bought meat and making fun of hunters and degrading us all the time, look who's paying now. That's all I can say.
Yeah, I can tell you, man, it's not cheap, and you're running, on average, you're running $3.23 to $3.63 a pound for ground beef, and that's $81.19, and that's in bulk. That's in bulk. That's buying 80 pounds a pop. So when you break that down and you factor in fabrication prices and packaging prices and labor prices, it's massive, and it'll stabilize at some point, but it's not going to get any better if we don't change what we do, pandemic or not pandemic, crisis or no crisis. If we don't start, I personally think, if we don't start trying to live a little more off the land instead of trying to create the land, per se, if that makes sense, then we're going to be in trouble soon, because you can only create so much.
Yeah, guys, listen up on the show. Try to figure out how to get out and kill some animals, or learn how to forage, which we're getting ready to get into too, because you're gonna be breaking the bank for long. I can't imagine in the next 10 or 15 years how much a steak or how much ground beef is gonna cost. But I can say one thing: I won't be buying it.
No, and you're gonna end up seeing lab created protein meat, and not end up. It's already happening.
Yeah, that's a whole. We could do a whole episode on that. That lab grown meat in itself makes me want to gag. So you do a little bit of foraging, right? What kind of stuff are you going out to forage? And is there any specific things that you go out, maybe and try to gather over other things?
Yeah, I absolutely love it. I got into it, in this part of the country and many parts of the country. Morel mushroom hunting is a big thing, and it's depending on your region and where you're at, your climate, it can be as short as a 3 to 4 week window, and it can be as long as a 2 to 3 month window season. So that obviously, as a kid, kind of inspired my joy for that, and it really never left that for a long time. We would go out and try to find them. We wouldn't even go every year. But as I've become into my adult years and into my career, foraging for mushrooms primarily is what started it, and I started to learn just different mushrooms. I would strongly encourage this practice or something of the sort to 100% know what the heck you're picking before you consume it. And if you have no idea, or you have any kind of inclination at all that it's not what you think it is, do not eat it. Because there are mushrooms in Missouri, and I've had them growing in my front yard before, that will kill a grown man if you eat one cap. And so, just kind of disclaimer there. But it's evolved for me. One of the things that I do with mushrooms is I hunt seps and hunt bullets and wood ears and oysters and chanterelles and morels, and there's lots of them that I'm familiar with now, but it's taken me a very long time to get there. And I don't add more than 1 or 2 items a year that I want to go out and try to find outside of the species that I'm already familiar with and that I can identify with no question. As I've grown in my career and in my being an outdoorsman, I've added in, I love to find gooseberries, and my daughter, this is something my daughter and we do all the time. She loves to go with me, and I would encourage people to do it. It adds food to your table. It gets you outside, in the sunshine, family time, and it's cheap, and it's not something that has to be quiet. You don't have to be quiet while you're doing it. And I know a lot of people have a hard time hunting or fishing whenever they're with their children or something, because they, the commotion and what you have to do. And this is something that's super good to bring out people who have not been out in the outdoors often, or don't know a whole lot about finding your own food, to introduce them to. I love wild asparagus. Now that's hard to find, and honestly, I don't have a really good patch for that. That comes up every year, usually in the same spots. But greens, I've been getting into different greens. You got pulp greens. Of course, you have turnip greens and all of those things too, collard greens, and those are mostly domesticated, but you can find them wild. So yeah, man, there's a lot. The other day, my daughter and I weren't feeling good, and we went up to a place I know, and we cut off some eastern white pine branches and some red cedar and made tea out of it. I will say a little disclaimer that the cedar, it's great for a chest cold or being congested in your chest, but there's a chemical in there, and I'm not good at pronouncing it. I think it starts with a T, that you can't consume too much of. And I think for a healthy, normal adult, average size and build, you can have roughly a cup a day. Now, this, don't hold me to this. I'm no doctor, and I don't, each person's different. But so for my kid, I gave her about half a cup, and I only gave it to her one time. That being said, it helped her. And God provided everything that we need to survive on this earth without creating it or without pumping it full of something to get more out of it. So it's just a matter of getting out there and finding it.
So I probably already know the answer to this too, but I'm going to ask you anyway. When you forage for stuff, let's say wild asparagus, you can obviously buy that at the store. I have to assume that it tastes better. Does it taste different than asparagus you buy at the store? I've never had wild asparagus, so I don't think I would have anything to compare it to.
Yeah, I mean, it's gonna be a little different. It's gonna be the chlorophyll that's in it is going to be stronger. It's going to be grown in natural soil and natural sunlight, and all of those things change the makeup of it. And then most importantly, it's not going to be spoon-fed something to force it grow. It received the nutrients that it needed naturally, and it created what it was made to create on its own. And I know that may sound a little silly to some people, but when you start adding in all of these things and all of these processes to create something, to grow something, or to raise something and harvest, it really starts adding up on what it does to the flavor and the taste and the nutrients of it. So yeah, it's going to be quite different as a whole. The flavor, if you were to eat fresh picked piece of asparagus from a little micro farm as opposed to out in the wild, you're probably going to get a larger piece of asparagus and a more perfect looking piece of asparagus on the one that was farmed, that was bought. That being said, the nutrients and the different flavor, and honestly, just the satisfaction of finding it on your own, that just, as you've mentioned, changes what the food does to you, your soul, and your body.
Yeah, it's interesting that you talk about like it being a better looking piece of asparagus or fruit or whatever it might be. I've watched some food documentaries that talk about that being a very important thing with supermarkets, is not so much what it tastes like or what the nutrients is, it's what it looks like, because the thing for them is they have to sell the product. So in order for you to pick the product up off the shelf, it has to be pretty, it has to look perfect. Once you get home and your tomato tastes like nothing or tastes like plastic, it doesn't really matter at that point because they've already sold it. So yeah, it's kind of crazy, the stuff that they do just to make it look pretty. Like they put have you ever seen the thing where they put like wax on apples and people like put them in boiling water? I've never tried it. I don't know how true it is, but they said that they wax the apples to make them look fresh or whatever, and people dip them in boiling water to get the wax off, and it just shows just kind of some of the marketing tricks to boost their sales and stuff at the supermarkets.
Yeah,
I would almost rather have ugly food.
Yeah. Well, and that's just it. It is ugly. Like, natural good food is not perfect by any means. And there's culinary in the Olympics, and the judging for that is not based off the flavor one bit, not one point. It's based off the looks. And they will sit there and dip each individual pea, each individual carrot chunk, whatever it is, in aspic, and then build the plate like they're decorating scenery or something.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So back to kind of the foraging thing. Anybody that wants to get started in foraging, I haven't done a whole lot of it. I've hunted for morels like one time for a couple hours by myself trying to figure it out. Never found any. What's something good for somebody to start maybe foraging for without? I know there's always a risk, but what's something that might be more foolproof so somebody doesn't eat some crazy mushroom and end up 6 feet under?
Well, I think first and foremost, the most important thing is going to be surveying and evaluating your surroundings, your local area, your region of the country, and find out what's even available. And there's going to be a lot of things that are available east that aren't west, many things that are north but not south, and all things between. That being said, if it were me and I was going to try to teach somebody or tell them, as far as if you want to go out for mushrooms, one of my favorite ones, and it's, I think, one that's overlooked quite often because of morels. Well, a lot of mushrooms are because of morels, but those are good. Like, it's not bad. They're difficult to find, like you said, and you're not really morel hunting. Whenever you're morel hunting, you're more tree hunting than anything, because they like to grow around certain trees in certain regions of the country. But chanterelle mushrooms, they're delicious, and there's 3 primary kinds. I don't know about in other regions, other areas. I think it stands true, and I don't know that all of them may grow in every place, but where they do grow, I'm pretty sure most of these 3 versions do. And there's a smooth, a regular, just a smooth chanterelle, and then there's a golden chanterelle. And there's really not a whole lot of difference between them, other with the exception of the smooth one on the underneath is obviously smooth, and then on the other ones, they don't actually have gills, they just have ridges. And the reason I say that's one of the better ones, if the environment's right for that year and there's been enough moisture and a hot enough temperature, is that there, at least in my area, there are no lookalikes that could kill you, for one. And there's only one lookalike that would make you sick that's even out here. There's some differences between that and the chanterelle that are pretty apparent, and you're pretty safe on not picking anything. The lookalike's called a jack-o'-lantern, and the two biggest differences is the jack-o'-lantern has knife-like gills that resemble the ridges on back of chanterelles, but are really thin. And if you go to brush your thumb across it and break them, then they will actually break off like the gill underneath on any regular mushroom. And the second is that the chanterelles grow from the ground out of the soil, and a jack-o'-lantern will grow on decaying wood. That said, the wood can be buried and it looked like it's coming up out of the soil. But that's pretty rare, and they're a different color and they come up a little bit later. So if it were me, I would say a chanterelle mushroom or a well-known berry that you have around there. Lots of regions have gooseberries, blackberries, raspberries, and of course dozens of other ones, but there's quite a few of those across the country. And those are rewarding. Gooseberries suck and blackberries suck to pick because they're thorny. But, they're definitely good.
So I know you said you're not on a whole lot of social media other than Go Wild, but would you have any recommendations on social media or maybe books for somebody to look into if they want to maybe get involved in some foraging stuff? I didn't know if you had books that you carried with you, or if you had kind of taught yourself reading books.
I have tied, and actually, I was turning my head to look. Hold on one second.
He's
I've got a
getting one of
couple
his
of
foraging books.
Yeah, and so to answer your question, first off, most of the I don't usually carry these books in the field with me now, basically because of the age of smartphones, and you can scan or Google something. That being said, you got to have reliable reception. But so I would strongly encourage newcomers to foraging to absolutely take out something with you to look and identify whatever it is you're after. Secondly, do not eat it in the field. Like, bring it back and check it with your literature and your stuff to make sure. And if you're hunting for mushrooms, they make what's called spore prints. And if you read up on that a little bit, you can find out how to do that. And essentially, you're just taking it and you're putting it on a piece of paper, maybe a different colored paper depending on the mushroom, because the spore prints can be different colors. And you're covering it with a dome and letting it set overnight, and it's going to make a fingerprint, and that's going to help you. That's the primary way, other than looks, to identify. But the two books that I have are actually books that I forgot to take back from the library years and years and years ago, and I've had them for this whole time.
Hopefully nobody from the local library is listening. Kevin might be in trouble.
Actually, you know what? They just about a few months ago said that since subscriptions have been down, that if you owed any fines or had any books, they were wiping the slate clean. So I was happy about that.
No fines for Kevin.
This one's called The Edible Mushroom Book by Anna Bell Conte and Thomas. Boy, I can't pronounce it, but I don't know if you'd be able to see it.
It's called The Edible Mushroom Book. Anybody watching on YouTube might be able to catch the front cover. The Edible Mushroom Book.
And then I've got another one called Foraging Self-Sufficiency by David Squire. And that's a really good one. And that one branches out not just mushrooms into plants and berries and roots and tubulars and all kinds of stuff on that one. And for anybody watching on YouTube, there's this here. But
what's it called again? Foraging Self-Sufficiency?
Huh?
What's it called again?
It's Foraging Self-Sufficiency by David Squire.
Okay. Yeah, I'd encourage anybody. Maybe I need to check those books out too, but encourage anybody to check those out because there's probably a ton of information in there that you could use. Maybe they have a digital version. Might be cool to download and keep on your phone or something. I don't know.
I actually have one on my phone that, and I can't remember. I'm pretty sure I deleted it, but yes, there are those on there as well. And one of the best ways to figure it out is to go to your local conservation department's website or office, and most generally they have massive amounts of literature, and it may even be willing to give you copies of books to do so.
Cool. Yeah. It's something that I need to look into. I don't know a whole lot about foraging. I kind of know what a raspberry or a blackberry looks like, but I love mushrooms. I've eaten a lot of mushrooms from the store. But I see a lot of mushrooms out sometimes and I wonder, oh, is that edible? But I tend to not want to even touch it because I don't want to take a chance of poisoning myself or something. So I have to look into that. I guess what would be your number one favorite wild game recipe or dish? And could you kind of briefly maybe explain how to make it? I know that's probably pretty broad because there's a lot of wild game out there, but if you had to pick just off the top of your head, what are you going with?
Man, if I went off the top of my head on something that me and my daughter love to eat all the time, it would be venison street tacos. I absolutely love it. And there's dozens of ways that I make it. Sometimes I use ground, and I have a taco seasoning that I've got made up, or um, and add in onions and garlic and cook it all up, and then you can change up your toppings. And honestly, when I'm making tacos in the summer or in the spring, if I've shot enough deer that my freezer's still full, I like to make those with mushrooms as well, chanterelles or morels mixed in with the venison. But I also like to do like a loin, a backstrap, or even a roast off of like the sirloin, and slice it super thin and marinate it. And then marinating, I do 100 different things. It can be, and really it's based off what I have at the house at that moment. But anywhere from orange juice and liquid smoke to get in some citrus and smokiness, to Sprite and lemonade, to soy sauce and sesame oil, and then like one version I really like is an Asian street taco, and taking soy sauce and brown sugar, teriyaki, and sesame oil, a little vinegar, and mixing it up and marinating this thinly sliced backstrap in it for a couple hours or a night, or however, the longer the better. And then just simply sauteing that in some sesame oil, and then you can add in garlic and sesame seeds if you want, and ginger, and saute it up, and then top it with Asian broccoli slaw with like a ginger lime dressing, or just really any kind of slaw. You could do traditional with Napa cabbage and instead of lettuce, and pickled carrots and onions on there. That's probably our favorite. If I was choosing a go-to a version of street tacos.
Man, I have to say, I bet you a lot of people. I know you're not on a lot of social media, but you're on Go Wild, so I bet you a lot of people would love to see your recipe for that, or maybe anything that you have posted on Go Wild. But I know you got your own kind of thing going now with Epic Chef. We've kind of just mentioned the name a few times throughout the show, but I want you to really kind of explain what you got going on there. Are you going to be doing recipes? Are you going to be selling stuff? Is it more of a blog? Just kind of give the whole idea of Epic Chef and kind of your plans with it. Just let everybody know kind of what you got going on with it.
Man, that's a wonderful question, and and I've had Epic Chef in my head for over a decade. It originally started out, Epic's an acronym, as exceptional private in-home cooking. And the thought was to take restaurant quality and style food into people's homes and just streamline the process. Essentially the same restaurant experience that you would receive at a restaurant, I bring to you. Now it's never left anything beside the thought when it comes to that. And to be quite honest, Epic Chef has not even been verbally spoken of until the last 2 or 3, 4 months. Today, as I mentioned some earlier, in where I've had a desire to bring in my career with my passions of outdoors and the things that I do at home, with trying to provide food for me and my daughter from the wild, and just self-sustain as much as possible, to bring those into my career. And I know it may sound silly to people on to people out there that it's different, me being a chef and going to work and then coming home and cooking. But it always has been now I've always brought my love for being a chef into my home, but it's just been different. I don't know. It may not be clearly seen to somebody else, but it has been different for me in the past, and I really have a big desire to kind of merge those things. And so Epic today stands for educational private in-home cooking, and part of it is as I've talked about over the show, education on just how far away we've gotten from the way God made food when we come around here, and all of the things that we are that is being put into our food. And you've touched on it about the plastic and just how crazy it's gotten, and what it's doing to us. And so right now at this point, I'm doing a blog, Epic Chef, for Headline Outdoors, and the blog is named Epic Chef, and that was just the first thing that it came to mind when they asked me what to name it. And then here I am a few weeks later, and Epic Chef is a big discussion, at least in my world. So I think the blog's going to represent that, a lot of that transition to. And one of my big desires is to step back from the industrial food industry, hopefully eventually own my own thing as career-wise, but primarily by buying my food, by going and buying my food. One of the things that I really want to do is to transition from doing that. And while I'm a hunter and a fisherman and outdoorsman, and I love to sustain and provide and forage, I still go to Walmart on a weekly basis. And that the more I've thought about that, the more I've thought about just how hard it would be to completely eliminate that. And so a big focus of that is with Epic Chef is going to be just in my own life, doing that, what that looks like, how to do that, how am I going to accomplish it, what the plan is, what's the plan, and how am I going to execute it. And so in that blog, that's going to be quite a bit of what I write about, obviously foraging and basically a whole lot of the stuff that we've talked about tonight. And moving forward, I'm not exactly sure what that looks like, about how to get that content to the public. I will be creating a Go Wild handle for Epic Chef, and I will be creating social media. I stepped back from the social media world years ago, 3 years ago, and it didn't kill me, and it didn't hurt my life, and I actually think it made it quite a bit better. So I just stuck with that for a little while. And I don't think that it's a bad thing to be on social media. And I think in my case, in your case, and millions of other cases, as far as trying to spread a message and trying to provide a service, it's extremely useful. And so I will certainly be doing that as well. But I don't know what that looks like to take that out to users. Right now, it's going to be me writing the blog and providing content on Go Wild and social media. And I don't know. I don't know if it's going to turn into something where I do educational videos or I really love to teach. And if there's anything I love as to cook, and that's to share what I've learned and to pass it along to somebody else. So however that's possible, and if it's possible for me to do that and have a career while doing so too, then I'm going to do it, because it is something I'm super passionate about. I think I know that we're killing ourselves on a daily basis, a little at a time, with what we're eating and what we're breathing and what we're doing. And there's a lot of that stuff I cannot control. I can't control what happens to the environment outside of my own little world. I can't control what goes on down the road, let alone across the country. But I can control what I put into my body, and I can control what I project to others. And so that's kind of the inspiration for Epic Chef. Where it's going to go from there, I'm not 100% sure.
Now, I'm probably not the best guy to give advice on this or whatever, but I'll just kind of tell how Hunt the Wild kind of started. I started it kind of as a way to document my journey. And originally, I started with a website and a blog back in 2018. And my idea back then was to have a few guys from across the whole United States writing blogs every week and kind of telling their story to kind of give readers a chance to hear from the West Coast, the East Coast, the North and the South, kind of what's going on, rut activity or squirrel hunting or bear hunting or running dogs or fishing or whatever they're wanting to do. And I never really it never really took off. It just never really worked out. And I was earlier this year, I was like, man, I should start a podcast. Maybe, maybe that's something I can do by myself, have guests on and kind of have the same kind of concept, but be able to cover a lot more topics and talk with a lot more people. So you just kind of got to get started, I think. Anybody wanting to start that kind of thing, I think you just figure it out as you go and you just kind of go where the road takes you. And next thing you know, you're doing a podcast. Maybe you do a podcast on cooking and foraging and stuff like that. It'd definitely be something that I would listen to. And I'm sure a lot of the listeners would be interested in that too, because it ties in with hunting. If you kill something or you forage something, 99% of the time, you're probably going to cook it. So we need good recipes to know how to make good stuff.
For sure, man. For sure. That's some good stuff. And good to hear how other people have done so and not really known how it's gone and whatnot. Because I'm definitely there, but I'm excited for it. And I know that you got to put this name Epic Chef in my head over 10 years ago. So I don't have any reason to believe that he put it in there just to leave me down this last 10 years and then drop it in my lap right now and then nothing come of it. So I'm excited to see how it goes.
I love documenting stuff. I love being able to just look back, maybe at my first Instagram post when I first started this, or even looking back in August when I first started this podcast. I'm like, gosh, what was I thinking on the first podcast? I was so rough. I didn't know anything about it. And I'll probably think that about this might be episode 29 or 30. I'll probably think, man, episode 30 was rough when I get to 100. But it's just kind of a growing process, and you figure it out, and it's cool to look back on. So we're getting close to the time limit here of recording. I just wanted to say thanks for taking the time and coming on. Can you tell everybody where to find you on Go Wild? I know you said you're going to start some other social media for Epic Chef. Will it be under Epic Chef if you're on Instagram or anything like that?
Yeah, anything that I create for Epic Chef that's not something that I don't already have, which, like I said, is only in Go Wild, then it will be handled under Epic Chef. You can find me personally right now on Go Wild just under Kevin Blankenship, and any information that I think that needs to go out to kind of help market the Epic Chef handles and places that it can be found will go on my personal page there. And then I will also be creating an email, and one of my kind of ideas I'm going to create this email and I'll post it out, and I may not get any return whatsoever, but to just ask people, what do you want to see? Like, what do you want to hear? You've given me some really good feedback on what you would enjoy. So I have not created that email yet, but that, unless it's taken, which I don't think it's going to be, is going to be epicchef@gmail. But again, I will post that at my personal page on Go Wild.
Cool. I look forward to catching up with you, and I'm going to hit you up in the future if I need any recommendations on cooking, because I cook quite a bit, but I'd say that I cook a lot of the same stuff, and I'm always open to try new stuff. So I'm sure you've probably got the the book of knowledge to get that done.
Hey man, it's mostly book of failures, so I know what doesn't work, so then I can do what does.
Cool, man. Let's get out of here, and I'll catch up with you. Everybody, hit Kevin up on Go Wild if you want to contact him. Got questions about cooking or foraging or anything? I'm sure he'd be happy to answer them.
Absolutely, I appreciate it. Thank you to Hunt the Wild, and have a good week.
Yep, we'll see you, Kevin.
See you, man.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Hunt the Wild podcast. If you enjoyed the show and it's brought you some sort of value, I'd love if you could give me a rating and a review. Just a few seconds of your time can help me better understand the type of content you all enjoy, and it would mean the world to me to hear from all of you.